So I hope you all are comfortable. So good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to this webinar session. It's great to see so many attendees. As we will talk today about a topic we may ask ourselves from time to time, that is, on how to shape our own future, hopefully into a positive, happy and fulfilling one. Today's topic, as shown in the slide, is building the future I want to live. My name is Michael Finkelstein. I'm a financial manager working and living in Switzerland, and additionally, I'm a student and instructor of Logosophy. This webinar is part of a series of virtual activities we have held as part of the commemoration of 90 years of Logosophy in the world. In case you want to attend further activities or get in touch with us or watch past activities, we will show a slide at the end of this webinar with directions in YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Before we start with today's activity, I'd like to say a few words about Logosophy, outlining its origin, its purpose, and where you can find us throughout the world, and especially in Europe. Logosophy was created back in 1930 in Cordoba, Argentina, by the thinker, educator, and humanist Carlos González Pecochi, who lived between 1901 and 1963 in Argentina. Afterwards, many other logosophical cultural centers of study were created in Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, and also in Europe, with the objective of divulging this original knowledge for human excellence. These cultural centers are more than just a physical place, as they offer an experimental ground that is very favorable to the study and practice, as well as to the exchange of opinions between the students. In addition to the cultural centers, you will also find Logosophy in the educational system in the countries mentioned before, with the teaching done in accordance to the local curriculum and with the pedagogical work that prepares the student for life with the support of the logosophical conception. It is important to know that the Logosophical Foundation is a privately owned institution without lucrative political or religious goals. In Europe, the cultural center is located in Barcelona, Spain, which together with the students of Logosophy living in many countries in Europe, including the UK, also organize information courses absolutely free of charge. So you may ask yourself, what is Logosophy? Let me start by stating what Logosophy is not. Logosophy is not a religion, it's not a sect, it's not a self-help group. No, Logosophy is a science, and as such it presents itself. As the author himself states, we should not believe his words, but replace belief by knowledge that can only be achieved by experiencing and applying his teachings in one's life. These teachings come to satisfy our innermost concerns about our existence and of the humanity by providing knowledge and a method which will aid us in our search for the spiritual knowledge, which gets kickstarted by the knowledge of our own self. These teachings are also extremely useful and practical for our day-to-day life and how we go about it. Let me use the definition provided by the author himself. Logosophy is the science of the present and the future because it embodies a new and unsurpassable form of conceiving life, of thinking, and of feeling. I'm sure we will touch at some of these aspects during today's activity so as to get a proper understanding of these words. Now I'd like to introduce Zora Kovacic to you, who will share with us her experience on how she went about building her future with the help of the logosophical teachings. Zora is Italian and Brazilian and lives in Barcelona, Spain. She is a researcher by training and holds a doctorate title in environmental science. She is also a student and instructor of Logosophy. I hope you will all enjoy it, and please feel free to raise questions or to comment using the chat functionality, and we will do our best to answer them by the end of this webinar. Zora, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. And good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So to get us started, I wanted to suggest that we do a little reflection. Everyone can try to reflect about some questions that I'll pose just within yourselves. And the first question is, when you think about the future, what do you feel? I realize this may be a bit of a charged question in times of COVID. Maybe we feel a little bit more uncertain about the future right now than we did at other times in our life, especially if we live far away from our family, or maybe someone's job has been affected by the lockdowns. So you can do this exercise by thinking about how you feel about the future right now, or you can just think of some other time in your life and reflect a little bit. How do you normally feel about the future? As for me, this has been a big topic my whole life. I remember when I was a kid, when I finished primary school and I had to change school, I was really sad because I was afraid of growing up and stop being a child. I was afraid of the future. As time went by, I have stopped feeling that fear, but what has stayed with me is the feeling that the future is something unknown, out of my control, and that always made me feel uncomfortable. So, does the concept of future that I have affect my life? In my case, the uncertainty that I felt about the future generated uncertainty in my life. If I don't know whether I can achieve something or not, is it worth making the effort? If we are told that a big economic crisis is coming, is it worth starting a new business or leaving a job that I don't really like? If I don't have a stable job, is it crazy to start a family? All these doubts can be paralyzing. And what if I feel paralyzed in my own life? What is the consequence of having this feeling? There is a thought in Logosophy that says, our life is like the text of a book that carries our name on it, and in which we must be the main protagonist, the prominent character, if we do not want to be relegated to a secondary position, and worse still, for having played an insignificant role. When I first read this statement, I didn't think much of it. I thought, of course, I'm the protagonist of my life. Who else would it be? But seeing how the uncertainty about the future would paralyze me at times, I started asking myself if maybe sometimes I didn't have a secondary role in my own life. If I wait for things to get better, if I wait for answers, who is the protagonist of my life? Me or the circumstances? Have I ever played a secondary role in my own life? I started to see that the way I thought about the future affected my life. For example, women in modern times often have to choose between pursuing a professional career or starting a family. Or if we want to be a little bit more modern, trying to do it both and feeling like we're failing at everything. And many women in my family have told me that they have chosen to have kids, and because of this, they haven't been able to pursue their professional aspirations. And sometimes they have given me the advice not to give up on my dreams or my talents, or to wait before having a family, having kids. So it looks like going towards the future is a little bit like closing doors, letting go of opportunities that we used to have. I'm a researcher, as Mike said. And in the academic world, international experience is valued very highly. In fact, there are some funding opportunities that require international experience. This means that many of my colleagues in my field, they feel that they have to choose between having the career that they want or living where they want. And sometimes moving to a different country creates a conflict with people's partners or with their families. So it looks like we have no choice but to live in an eternal struggle, having to give in somewhere. I had this experience myself. Some years ago, my partner, he moved to Ecuador for 1 year following a professional opportunity that he got. And because he was pursuing his professional objectives, that meant that we had to put our relationship to the test. When he left, I was afraid that our relationship would suffer. I was afraid it might even end. But also I realized that a life together didn't need to mean making sacrifices for the other person. Or at least that's not the relationship that I wanted. One that feels like a prison that takes our freedom away. So I started looking for a new concept that could guide me. Something that I asked myself many times was, is it possible to reconcile the wish to have a family with individual freedom? The author of Logosophy says, we can only conceive a family as an indissoluble nucleus when parents and children identify with each other regarding the similar yearnings and ideas they sustain. Even though this might seem incomprehensible at first, it will cease to be so as soon as one thinks that this does not imply depriving man of his freedom to go wherever he wants as he accomplishes his individual objectives. So how can we create an ideal that unites us and gives us freedom at the same time? The study of the logosophical conception of the family was very important to me during that year. I wanted to form this shared ideal with my partner without taking away neither one's freedom. Something that I understood was paramount was to build this ideal based on reality and not on fiction. Forming a shared ideal is not the same as imagining that we will want the same things. Each one of us had, and we still have our own aspirations. So in order to work within reality and not fiction, it was important for me to learn to respect the aspiration of the other person without feeling threatened by it. During that year, my partner grew professionally, and I went to visit him when I could while keeping my job in Barcelona. So we experienced firsthand the reality of both having our freedom without giving up on the ideal of the life that we wanted to build together. This experience taught me to work on an invisible realm, an invisible plane. It is very common for people to take as their point of reference the physical, the materiality of things, right? So being together is conflated with living in the same house or having the same experiences. But when we don't have something tangible that represents our relationship, we may feel insecure. I know I did. So being far away from each other feels like a problem. During that year, I learned how to take care of the invisible part of our bond, of our relationship, building this shared ideal. And I learned to trust this invisible part, to trust my feelings. Now, when my partner came back from Ecuador, I lived the opposite situation. in order to live together in the same city, I had accepted a job that I didn't really want. I remember the first day of work, I was talking to a colleague and I told him that I would have rather applied for a position in a research center in Norway, which is very well known in my field. So I was going through a personal struggle inside of me every time I went to work because I wasn't happy with what I had chosen. And this situation made me face a reality that I hadn't seen before, which was that I didn't really know what to give priority to. When I was living apart from my partner, I thought that the priority was for us to be together. And when he came back to Barcelona, I wasn't sure if maybe I should have prioritized my job. So what are the consequences of not knowing what to prioritize? And how do I feel when I change my mind every day? But during that time, I found this little writing by the author of Logosophy he said, he who changes his mind every day cannot live happily. Unstable minds are always the product of an inconsistency with oneself, of the absolute lack of knowledge of what life must mean for one and for the others. Have I ever felt this instability? Am I inconsistent with myself? And if so, how can I stop being inconsistent? There is a very important concept in Logosophy, which is the concept of self-inheritance. This is a very original concept, I think. Usually when we talk about inheritance, we may think of the money or goods that we may inherit from our family, or we may think of the psychological characteristics or the interests maybe that we inherited from our parents. But Logosophy talks about self-inheritance. So some examples, simple examples that hopefully can help me explain the concept are, if I tidy my house, I will inherit tidiness when I come back home. If I don't postpone what I have to do, I will inherit time the next day. If I have a misunderstanding with someone and I don't fix it, I will inherit a weakened relationship with that person. And if I do fix it, I will inherit trust. So it seems that what I do, what I think and what I do today has consequences for who I will be tomorrow. Understanding my self-inheritance is a way of being consistent with myself. If today I change my mind all the time, in the future, I will inherit confusion, uncertainty, inconsistency. At some point, I understood that it's not the future that is uncertain, but it was my own fickleness about it that made me inherit this uncertainty. So for this reason, I decided to initiate a study, an individual study, about my life objectives. This was a very important study for me. It lasted about 3 years. And I started by asking myself what I wanted. It wasn't an easy question to answer. And realizing this already helped me see that I had many ideas, but also a lot of confusion. I mixed up some big things and some small things. Some objectives were well-defined, while others were more like in a draft state. Thinking about what I wanted helped me see what was still undefined. And in order to define these less defined parts, it was very important to for me to ask myself why I wanted each thing. what would that objective mean for my life? This was a new experience for me. Instead of struggling, of feeling that I had to give up some objectives to reach others, I understood that what I needed to do was to give each objective its correct weight. So what did my profession mean to my life? What did forming a family mean to my life? What did nurturing my internal being, who I want to be, mean for my life? Clearly, these objectives don't have all the same weight. And understanding the value of each objective allowed me to put things in order within myself and to stop feeling that my objectives were in tension with each other. So once I defined my objectives and my priorities, how do I build the future that I want to live? Logosophy says the secret lies in preparing in advance our future, planting today what we aim to harvest tomorrow. This way, we will enjoy beforehand the pleasure of managing consciously what the future brings us. If we are capable of turning this into the main and permanent objective of our life, we will convert ourselves into the architects of our own happiness. What does it mean to plant what I want to live? And how do I do it? I had an experience that helped me understand how to put this secret into practice. Someone very close to me in Italy at some point was going through some hard times and he climbed up. And this means that when I went to my hometown to visit my friends and family, I couldn't reconnect with him. It was really hard to keep our bond. And this made me really sad because I lived in a different city and so I had very few opportunities to keep in touch with this person. And it was really hard on me because we've had a very important bond throughout my childhood. So in one of my visits, I decided to prepare for how I wanted to live the days ahead. While I was on the airplane flying to Italy, I remembered how I felt about this person when I was a kid, how important he had been in my life. This memory prepared my sensibility for the days to come. Preparation was not about making some action plan. It was not about thinking about what to say or what to do, but it was about preparing my best feelings. Just a quick side note. According to Logosophy, sensibility is a mechanism which is made up of our sensitive faculties and of our feelings. And according to Logosophy, our sensibility can become a strength, a force that brings us closer to reality. So, for example, when we have a misunderstanding with a friend or a family member, if we can remember the friendship or the feeling of affection for that person, we are unlikely to put the relationship at risk just because we want to be right. Our sensibility reminds us of the reality of that relationship. This mechanism, our sensibility, is part of those invisible things that we get to know through the study of Logosophy. So going back to my experience, when I finally met that person, I didn't face the situation with fear of struggling to reconnect with him. I felt a lot of gratitude for all that that person had meant in my life. And this person treated me with the greatest affection. I finally got what I had looked for so many times when I went back home, which was a strong bond, a reconnection. This experience taught me that I could prepare the future that I want to live. So through the study of my life objectives, I learned to define objectives both externally and internally. Part of what had me confused was living outside of myself. In the beginning, I only had clarity about my professional goals because they are defined externally. Part of what defines this goal is can be ideas that we find in our culture, in our society, but also these aims are more concrete, and so they are easier to define. We know the steps that we need to take to get there. Other objectives, like forming a family, were also clear, but in that case, I felt unsure about how to get to what I wanted. What could I do to build the family that I wanted? This was more like something that I hoped would happen than a plan. And I realized at some point that this is having a secondary role in my life. To me, it was an insight to understand that with regard to the most important objectives of my life, I ran the risk of having a secondary role in my own life. I also learned to define internal objectives. For instance, who do I want to be? Defining internal objectives is much harder because it requires knowing ourselves. So how can I be more than the professional, someone's partner, daughter, mother, or friend? How can I nourish my essence, my spiritual part, so to speak? This is a part of my study that I've been able to keep developing thanks to the study of Logosophy. So to wrap up, thanks to this study that I did about my life objectives, many of my internal struggles were tamed. Some years later, I got the job in Norway that I had wanted so much. And this time, my partner stayed in Barcelona and I moved. But the experience was completely different. I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel like I was putting my relationship at risk. I went to Norway knowing that my other life objectives were still valid and I wouldn't forget about them. I wouldn't postpone them. A few months ago, our daughter was born, and I feel very happy to have found a way of not giving up on what was important to me. This doesn't mean that my life is perfect and that I don't have my hard times. I have some better days and some worse days like everybody else. But thanks to the logosophical knowledge, I feel like my life is no longer about surviving struggles, but that I can direct it towards the future that I chose for myself. Instead of cultivating the fantasy of having it all, I have tried to get what I wanted within the limits of what reality allows. I have learned the importance of a few elements that I would like to share with you to close this webinar. One is to live in reality and not in fiction. And this can be done, for example, by creating realistic goals and projecting a future that adapts to reality. I've learned to prepare the future that I want to live. For example, thinking about how I want to live the experiences that I have to live or that I want to live. I am learning how to make a force out of sensibility by giving stability to what I want and not changing my mind every day. I am getting to know my self-inheritance, and that is working in the invisible realm. So seeing beyond immediate results and thinking about what inheritance I create for myself through the decisions that I make. And finally, a very big change that I have experienced is that I went from feeling very uncertain about the future to trusting the future. Thank you very much for your attention, and I give the word back to Mike.
Thank you very much, Zora. It is certainly very refreshing to hear for once what we want in our life and how to go about it. What knowledge we need to possess in order to reach informed decisions. What are the choices and options we have to weigh in with consciousness? Because normally we don't know what we really want in our life, in addition to perhaps finding a fulfilling job or raising a family, or we know what we don't want in our life, particularly after bad experiences. Isn't that so? So in that sense, I hope Zora's presentation was helpful and that you all managed to take away important elements to think about it. So Zora provided during this activity many insights and resources you could count on, and which you can all read in the extensive bibliography, which you can download absolutely for free by accessing the site as shown in the slide. Now, please feel free to raise questions or to provide comments by writing into the chat functionality. Or perhaps the day was just a long day to everybody. Anyway, in the meantime, I'd like to mention, or as mentioned already, in case you want to know more about Logosophy, we offer information courses for free, comprising 3 to 4 weekly meetings, normally held online. I invite you to visit our website, as you will be able to get further information and insights on Logosophy, and also get in touch with us. In case that you are following us from outside Europe, we will redirect, of course, to the appropriate country. And I will now copy the link shown in the slide in case to make it easier for you to reach out and get in touch with us. So I see that there are no real questions.
We have a question in the chat. Shall I read it?
Please.
So Caitlin says, I am new to Logosophy and would like you to expand more on what you mean by sensibility. So I'll try, and Mike, you can chip in if you want to add something. So this is part of the study of Logosophy is getting to know ourselves, and the author of Logosophy uses these images to help us understand what we have to observe when we say getting to know ourselves, when we say observing our within and not looking just outside. And so he says we have a mental system and a sensitive system. And this is our sensibility. It's a system or a mechanism, and it's made up of our faculty to feel, for example, to want, to love, to suffer. So these faculties that have to do with, well, feelings. And it's made up also of our feelings. So when we, for example, when we give stabilities to some feelings and they become part of our life and not just something that we feel one day at some point and then it goes away, it becomes part of this system. And in that sense, it can become something very strong, right? Something which is one of the reasons why the author speaks of the sensibility as being potentially a force.
Yeah, I think what I can add to this, Zora, I think that everybody must have felt when you want something by heart, really by heart, how does it feel? Doesn't it feel slightly different? When you want something by heart, you want it with your whole life, right? If you want something by heart. If it's just a mental thing, it may come around or it may just fade. So this just shows, you know, how the sensitivity, you know, really shapes our world. It's just that we have very often very, very poor concepts about it. Are there any other questions? I don't see that many here.
There is a question from Sheila who asks, we learned that our destiny is written. So Logosophy says that we can write our destiny. Well, if we acquire the capacities for it, Yes, I think that's what Logosophy says. It's not automatic, right? We have to learn how to do it. This is part maybe a little bit of this distinction, right, between reality and fiction. So it's not enough to visualize what I want and really, really want it very badly, but I also have to learn how to make a plan, stick to the plan, uh, see it through, and there's many elements in Logosophy that help us with that.
I see here another question here. So what Logosophy book would you recommend reading first? All right, I mean, as we mentioned, there's an extensive bibliography. I would say, I mean, at least for me, one of the books I would love to have gotten that from my parents is one which is called Basis for Your Conduct, right? It's like the father, you know, giving some very, very good advice to his son. So the basis for your conduct. That would be one for sure. And another one which gives a very good introduction. This is the initiation course into Logosophy. That also provides a very good foundation. All right.
One of my favorites is Introduction to Logosophical Cognition. This is a bit of a thicker book. It's a collection of many conferences, but I like it because the conferences, they're very varied and diverse in topics, and so it gives a really good overview, I think, of the span of the type of studies that we do. I gave an example tonight of one aspect, but there's really many, many more topics that we study. I'll put it in the chat as well.
All right. I think there are no further questions. So as mentioned before, we do invite you to go to our website as shown in the slide prior to this one, so that you can get further insights and certainly raise many more questions that the extensive bibliography will certainly provide some valuable inputs. And yes, I would like to close now the session and thank you all very, very much for your attention and wish you all a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Mike, and good evening.